So the Fruit of Futures will give an insight into the importance of the city to the United Kingdom and the challenge of establishing a global centre of excellence for financial and professional services. This will be through the lens of the regeneration of the historic Spitalfields fruit and vegetable market, an example of how the developer, the Spitalfields Development Group, of which I was the chief executive, navigated the planning system, the property cycle, and the needs of an economically challenged local community. The objective, to provide a valve of expansion for the city at a crucial time by creating a new financial quarter fit for the future and indirectly contributing to all of our futures. Now, just prior to Brexit and the COVID pandemic, the square mile that we call the city contributed an impressive 76 billion in taxes, 10% of total UK tax take to the exchequer, and represented 7% of the UK economy. It produced a trade surplus of £59 billion, and it had a truly international workforce, 40% of whom were born outside the United Kingdom. It supported employment over 2 million workers, a relatively young workforce, with 60% aged between 22 and 39. On diversity, the gender split was 63% male and 37% female, and just over a quarter of the city workforce were of Black, Asian, or minority origin. But London's central place in the world's economy is in no small part a legacy of Britain's empire, with banks oiling the wheels of colonisation. The City of London survived the Second World War, but in the 1960s, after the austere post-war years, it was in danger of becoming a backwater as the power of the UK and sterling declined. Helped by the Big Bang in the 1980s, which was a policy of deregulation by the Conservative government under Margaret Thatcher, the city overflowed the bounds of the ancient walls of London, which were marked by cast iron dragons. The deregulation, which allowed foreign firms to undercut the very ample commissions of London's old boys network, attracted banks from the United States and elsewhere to the Canary Wharf development in the East End. The city leadership needed to respond, and they did so by setting out to identify and implement a number of key criteria for success required for re-establishing the city's position as the premier location for a global financial centre. Over the next 40 minutes, I will be identifying these success criteria, and especially one of them, the challenges of providing modern grade A commercial office space. I will conclude with a reflection on the city's response to current trends resulting from smart working practices and, of course, COVID. Stakeholder surveys were undertaken during the Thatcher government era, and it was clear that 5 key criteria were essential for the city to become an unrivaled global centre. It needed to attract the best, brightest, skilled workers to create an exceptional talent pool for business. It needed to create a business-friendly, transparent, and predictable working environment for tax, for regulation, and for law. It already had the advantage of language and time zone. To create and maintain a world-class built environment and infrastructure, commutable homes, modern quality office space with good open spaces, schools, leisure, culture, and transport. It needed to have a world-class access to international markets, physical and e-commerce. And it needed to encourage clusters of excellence in each business area, the best of the best. In 1986, the Thatcher government pressed the Big Bang button, which was a catalyst for transformation of the city. Legislation was passed to remove restrictive practices. This legislation removed fixed minimum commissions, abolished the single capacity rule that split brokers from jobbers, allowed for the first time foreign members to join the London Stock Exchange. And on deregulation, a move to light touch regulation, i.e. from rules-based to principle-based regulation. Under rules-based regulation, effectively, everything is forbidden unless it is allowed. Under principle-based regulation, everything is allowed unless it is forbidden. It was effectively an outcome-based regulatory system. The result was extraordinary. Businesses and internationally mobile capital sought a new home in the now business-friendly city, but could not find suitable Grade A office space, especially with large column-free trading floors, essential for those seeking to move from New York. The City Corporation immediately looked to see how it could facilitate an expansion of its stock of office space to accommodate this new demand. Due to the medieval street pattern, the only valve of expansion was by releasing sites for development that the city owned in the city fringe, until it was able to consolidate site ownerships within its own boundaries into large development sites. It also needed to streamline and fast-track its own planning processes and to reform planning policies to be explicitly in favour of commercial development. A fine balancing act between the needs of business, heritage, and a small but influential residential community. This was also the time that the London Docklands Corporation was redeveloping Canary Wharf and producing modern, attractive office buildings, which at that time the city considered a competitive threat. Fortunately, glasnost between the city and Canary Wharf came later in the 2000s, when the two combined their agendas and started working together. One of the sites and the subject of this lecture is the historic Spitalfields Fruit and Vegetable Market, a 12-acre site on the edge of the city, which had the potential to be regenerated to include Grade A offices, subject, of course, to Tower Hamlets providing planning consent, which we discovered was more an art than a science. The site was put on the market in 1987, and a consortium of 3 private sector companies, Balfour Beatty, Costain, and London and Edinburgh Trust, formed the Spitalfields Development Group and won a beauty contest. The reason that we won, apart from price, was that we had optioned a site in Hackney, which could accommodate a new Spitalfields fruit and veg market, which would be built and handed over to the corporation as an integral part of the deal. The next slides will illustrate the physical, economic, and social challenges of expanding the city into an historically significant area in a very poor neighbouring borough. Now, every site in London, in fact, if you put a shovel in the ground, you'll hit some history. Well, Spitalfields had a 2,000-year-old history. It was a Roman cemetery along Bishopsgate, which is a Roman road. It was the site of the St. Mary of Spital Medieval Hospital, and the word Spitalfields comes from the word hospital fields. It was a refuge for displaced people during the Great Fire of London. Later on in 1669, it was an old artillery ground. They did shooting there, and thus the name Gun Passage and Artillery Lane. And it then started in 1682 to become a market, a non-conformity market. Non-conformity because it didn't conform to the quality of the then livery, the guilds, the livery companies. In the 1700s, there was the first wave of immigration from the Huguenots. In 1880s, the Jewish settlement arrived in Spitalfields, where the sewing machine was invented and the clothing trade started. And of course, it's a great place in those days to buy bagels. In 1875, Robert Horner, a former market porter, purchased the market lease and built the Horner buildings as a permanent market structure. The 1900s saw more mass settlements, bringing Maltese, Irish, Scots, West Indian, Somalian, and latterly the Bangladeshi communities to the area. The corporation spots a good deal when it can. It was trading very well, and they bought the market in 1920. So they haven't owned it that long, but 1920 is when they did. Very patriotic traders funded a Spitfire fighter plane in aid of the war effort and called it Fruitation in the 1940s. And then, more to do with my presentation, in 1987, the corporation sold the 150-year-old lease, or the 150-year lease of the old market to the Spitalfields Development Group for £60 million plus 40 million for a new market. Plus, and I put this in, compensation to market traders They are very canny negotiators. I won't tell you how much we had to pay them, but it was a very, very big figure for them to move. The market had been running for more than 300 years, and it was a statutory market, and therefore needed an Act of Parliament to be moved. Here are 4 old maps. St Mary's Spital at the top here. You can see that, and the burial fields of the hospital, Spitalfields, hospital fields. You can see here the artillery shooting grounds being built here, while the market traded in the fields. In 1747, there became the permanent market with market trading structures around. And as I said, a market porter actually widened it and built the Horner buildings, which are there today as listed part of the market. This is what a typical scene in the 1920s would have looked like. Very congested, highly popular, but a bit of a nightmare to live. And it sold everything, not only fruit and veg, but they also had a bird market in those days. The drivers for regeneration, as far as Tower Hamlets and the local community were concerned, was to address social exclusion, to address economic poverty, and effectively to break down the Bishopsgate glass wall. The glass wall that went down the middle of Bishopsgate, the main road that separated the city from Tower Hamlets, so that prosperity and economic benefit could flow from the city into Tower Hamlets. The city agenda was expansion of the city, as I've mentioned, the demand for office space, but very importantly, to win the hearts and minds of local people, because Spitalfields was seen as the first of many. And it was merging those 2 agendas that was really the challenge. To give you an idea of the challenges, the educational levels, you can see in 1970, the arrows are in the wrong direction. Basically, it was falling with mass immigration. English was not the first language of many of the immigrants. So we had to address, in the regeneration program, education. Unqualified people, again, the arrows are in the wrong direction. So qualifications and jobs, hugely important. As you can see here, 58% of Spitalfields was Bangladeshi. So they were the main local community. These 2 maps show you the deprivation indices. The one on the left here is employment deprivation. The one on the right is multiple deprivation. Light color is good, i.e. not much deprivation. Dark colors is not very good. And you can see in Tower Hamlets, there was a lot of a big problem with economic deprivation. And here you can see on multiple deprivation from the bottom, that's income, that's child poverty, employment, health, education, housing, and access to services. Interesting here, this little sausage shape here is the ward of Port Soken that I represented as a common councilman and alderman. It had the same demographics as Tower Hamlets. So I had a fair bit of experience in addressing those issues. The regeneration process, well, when we bought the site, we produced a master plan with Richard McCormack, and we were very proud of this master plan, 750,000 square feet of offices. The pre-let rental in those days was £60 a square foot and rising. The investment yield was 4.5%. And we reckoned we could build this as one phase in 4 years. So it was really to satisfy the city's agenda of quickly getting modern office space in their adjacent city fringe. Horror upon horrors, the Act of Parliament was delayed 18 months to 1989. There were lots of protests by some of the residents who said that the market was a big employment generator. They kind of failed to realize that the market was actually failing economically and would have eventually been closed down, but be that as it may, we were delayed 18 months. And when we eventually got the Act of Parliament, we negotiated with Parliament that we would provide a £20 million package of benefits for local people, including leisure, including sports, local shops, community facilities, and things that they really needed. It met their agenda. But what does 18 months mean to a developer? Well, if you look at the economic cycle here, we bought it in 1987, rents were £60 a foot and rising. And then we hit the economic crisis of 1989. which was prompted by the massive sale of junk bonds and program selling. And when eventually we got the planning permission, you can see that the market had turned, the new planning had turned quite significantly. The same with values, yields at 4.5%. The lower the yield, the higher the price, the higher the investment value. And you can see when we came in 1989, it was really not a good time at all for the development process. So we missed the market cycle. Meanwhile, as part of the condition of the lease purchase from the city, we had to build the new Spitalfields market on the site that I mentioned we'd optioned, and that was opened in May 1991. That allowed us to take possession of the old Spitalfields market and start whatever we were going to start. But the economic market didn't allow us to start anything because we were in the height of recession. So we had a boarded up market. It was derelict, there was crime, the market lacked confidence. There was a very poor outlook for the future. We had a planning consent for a single phase scheme in 1998 scheme, which really wasn't appropriate to build out in one phase. We needed more flexible planning. So we started working with government to see what we could do. And we managed to win a bid with Michael Heseltine under his City Challenge programme. And I managed to get Spitalfields as part of the City Challenge programme. At that time in 1991, we'd managed to spend £168 million, to give you an idea of order. Interest rates were 15%. I'm sure some of you remember those days. So it was actually costing us £2,000 an hour with no prospect for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years in sight. So I decided that I would, rather than keep the market boarded up, I would open it up for what we call temporary or interim uses. And we would use this period to really get to know and work with the local community. So we created local food courts, we created lots of jobs, we enabled business startups, a local business association, did all the timber work and created all of those structures. And we revitalized the area and it became an engine of regeneration. Within the market, we had tennis courts, we had skate attack, we had 4 acres under glass, so we had plenty of room to do lots of things. And we created a temporary destination for visitors and started building up a relationship with the local community. So here are what we did in that time. We let out all of these. They used to be fruit and veg stalls. We actually had a temporary opera house. We built that. We had tennis courts here. And we actually put a drive-in cinema in the car park against the wall of a building adjacent. And we managed to get a second-hand projector from South Africa, where drive-in cinemas are quite common. And so we started to really be seen as being really good developers for the local community. And here was an excavation. Costain had bought a building some time before, and basically you couldn't walk across the road because there was a big excavation. So that was the excavation. Our contractor said, well, let's put a temporary ramp across there as a bridge. And I said, no, that's a swimming pool. So we managed to just tidy it up a bit. We put a bin liner in. We bought a gas turbine, secondhand 1 megawatt gas turbine. We took heat from the chimney and we exported power to the grid. We had a meter and we used this for the local community. If you wore a suit, you paid £5 for a swim. And if you had a local address, it was £1. And we found soon enough that actually it excluded an element of the population. We had male lifeguards, and so many of the local Bangladeshi women wouldn't swim there. So we did a training course for lifeguards for local women. So that was a really great success. Bethnal Green City Challenge, Michael Heseltine's project, we won 35 million over 5 years to really address some of the economic deprivation in the area. I chaired it and we had an action plan which reflected the new priorities of the Tower Hamlets area. And we very important, we established credibility not only with local people, but also with the government. These are some of the photographs of the time. We got local people to smarten up and put lights in some of the rather dank and dangerous crime-ridden alleyways. We got the kids involved with the sport on the sports field, senior citizens clubs, technology training, and of course our lifeguards. And we did out of bounds as well. We didn't build Sainsbury's, but we made sure that when it was built adjacent to Spitalfields, the first 300 jobs went to local people. These are some of the houses, housing estate. This is a really dreary housing estate, which we refurbished as part of the City Challenge programme. Big achievements in the 5 years. I've underlined the most important. We created 3,288 jobs in the depth of the recession. We created 259 new businesses. People received qualifications and training. Childcare spaces were created so the women could go to work and households weren't homebound. And we built social housing or facilitated social housing. I chaired it and a local councillor was my deputy chairman. Meanwhile, my shareholders said, come on, Bear, you're having all this fun with temporary uses. We've got a lot invested here. What are we doing with the main purpose, the regeneration programme? Well, we decided that we would actually go for a flexible multi-phase master plan development. And this is what it looked like. So these buildings could be built separately or together. The residential was on the northern boundary against this conservation area. We retained the Horner buildings, that's a conservation here, and it was low in height on this Tower Hamlets end here. So in massing terms, it fitted really well. And we managed to eke another 250,000 square feet of office space. Started with 750,000 up to a million. The market was strange in those days. We knew we couldn't build the commercial element because there just wasn't a demand. So we started phase 7, which was residential. And that was a great success. And we even won an award. So we built 187 units and a green space adjacent to the market. That allowed us then to move to a demand-led program, and ABN AMRO bought this site, and Costain and Balfour Beatty built them their first building. We allowed local people in to strip out the desks and the glass and everything. They used that, they recycled it within Tower Hamlets, and it's a great success. One of the big issues in Tower Hamlets was graffiti. So we decided to get the schools involved in a field of flags, dressing up the hoardings, and we got and that was a great success. We didn't have any. The first site that had no graffiti, no truancy in the area. This is what the ABN AMRO building looked like. High on Broadgate is here, high on the city side, going down towards Tower Hamlets. Framing the beautiful Hawksmoor Church. That was part of the planning condition. Whatever was built there needed to frame this beautiful Christ Church at Spitalfields. We managed to persuade the contractors, both of the residential and Balfour Beatty, Costain, and we achieved between 10 and 13% at local labour construction. So that was a great success. And that's what it looks like today. The frontage was, and we kept the market going, the back bit of the market. We kept the stalls, we kept the animation, we had live festivals and worked with the community. It was a great energy in the place. Alternate Fashion Week we had, and these are just some of the pictures. And we won another award. There's probably a relationship between winning awards and making money, but I will come on to that later. Meanwhile, our prayers were answered. The London International Futures and Options Exchange, LIFFE, decided they wanted to come to Spitalfields. They wanted to continue with their open outcry trading. And they bought the site from us with a support building here. So basically the whole middle, the whole commercial element of the site would go to LIFFE. It was the battle, mother of all planning battles, getting planning permission from this and Tower Hamlets. We'd already done 2 planning permissions before, so we were quite masterful at it. But you know, it was really quite a difficult one. And so again, principles of the master plan were respected, you know, high on the city side, low all around, respecting all the local communities and activities there. LIFFE were a model occupier, being traders. They went to all the schools and they set up pitches, trading pitches, and they found that the kids were absolutely intrigued, supernumerate, and they agreed a social compact that when their building was finished, they would purchase a supply chain. They would purchase their supplies from Tower Hamlets and the East End, and the community would benefit from all those initiatives. Meanwhile, Michael Heseltine was very pleased with what we'd done with City Challenge, so we got another £12 million, again, to really put the visitor map in place so people would visit Spitalfields. We did a lot of work with the streets and the wayfinding, and we broke down barriers excluding the community from employment. Created more jobs, we safeguarded jobs, we created more businesses. So basically, you know, the government policy of inner city regeneration really helped us and we helped them. Some of the flagship projects, they created Banglatown as Chinatown, and we did up all of the curry houses and retail in Brick Lane. And we bought the local community a building which we then fitted out as the Rich Mix Centre, which is very successful even to this day. And we even moved the temporary swimming pool to the Bishopsgate Goodsyard site a little bit north. So it wasn't so temporary, we moved it. And then horror upon horrors, LIFFE withdraws. Their board had decided that actually the future was electronic trading, not open outcry. And basically they withdrew. They sold their site back to the city and we were back to square one. So what we decided to do, to be ready for when the market did recover, we would basically address all the elements of the site that would delay. And the most important was the archaeology. So I got 120 archaeologists for a year, digging away with toothbrushes and toothpicks. There was a roof over it because it was a burial site. And the idea was really, once we cleared the archaeology, we could actually start building with a 3-year program, moving the uncertainty and removing the risks of starting. So that's really where we were doing the archaeology. And then I thought we'd had enough horrors. We found a sarcophagus. Now this is in the front of the site. It had been a gravel pit. And those gravel diggers were negligent. They hadn't removed this one, only joking. But this was not really meant to be there. And the television cameras were there in no time at all. So I had to work out how we could move the sarcophagus to the Museum of London. And inside the sarcophagus was a Roman princess. And from the skeleton in there, I got a forensic pathologist to remake her face as though she had been a murder victim. And he said, the pathologist said, this is what she would have looked like. Not sure about the hair, but that is, the facial elements are exactly right. So we made a positive out of what was a scary negative, finding the sarcophagus in the middle of a development site in London. And I also created a pop-up real-time exhibition centre, and we had 28,000 people through there in a month. So people started coming to Spitalfields to see, observe, and they realised how close it was to the City and Liverpool Street station. More skeletons. And then we also found a charnel house, because it was that wasn't meant to be there. It was a charnel house is a chapel associated with a cemetery, and basically it's there to move the bones if there's any alterations to the cemetery. So we had approval to take it away, but I kept it, and I'll show you how we incorporated it as part of the development. Then Allen and Overy, one of the Magic Circle companies, law firms, decided that they wanted new space, and they thought that Spitalfields was very edgy. It was a new location, and they wanted to be groundbreakers for creating a new legal quarter. And they were also London LIFFE's lawyers. So the futures bit continued, and they were prepared to enter into the social compact that LIFFE had entered with a local community. And they came up, Norman Foster designed us, again, combining the buildings in the old master plan into a building exactly for Allen and Overy. So this is the trend. This was the one phase master plan, moved to capable of being joined up individual buildings. This is the LIFFE scheme joining them up. And then the Foster scheme actually in fingers respected the very important conditions of planning. We had a local consultation process with local people. In those days, they didn't have digital cameras. So I bought them all a £5 Boots camera, and they went round London taking photographs of they wanted in their square. The kids wanted an allotment, so actually in the square there is a vegetable allotment. They wanted a sculpture park, and we have that. They wanted in the flagstones, the paving, to bury in light boxes some of the archaeology. So we were able to do that. And that's a picture of the Allen and Overy last phase. We won another award that tells a story. So this is what it looks like today. It's a great success. As an engineer, fantastic fun building it with a steel truss, getting the glazing in place. You can see how close it is to the City of London. And it took 20 years to complete after the site purchase. Very busy. Again, that is a view of the church. And we get thousands and thousands of people every day enjoying this new quarter of London. This is how we put the charnel house underneath the Allen and Overy building. We actually cantilevered, we put a beam over, so you can actually walk down and visit it. And it is an extraordinary place. It was a greenish building at the time, green roofs. It had running tracks around because they were fingers. They had running tracks around. We had ground coupling and photovoltaic cells that produced 5 to 10% of the energy. And the back bit of the Allen and Overy building backed onto the market, and we had a kind of interim market, which really was very complementary to the existing preserved market buildings, and lots more things. That's what it looks like today. And we managed to achieve our objective, eventually worked from lots and lots of different organizations ourselves. The education level started improving in the area, and it was a great triumph. And of course, employment, this is 1991. This is unemployed reducing, and employment increasing. So Tower Hamlets and the local community gained from that. And we won our credibility with the local community. We were able to look at wider regeneration. And these are some of the sites that we looked at going north, and these are now built out, except for the Goodsyard, which is still undergoing some planning. So you can see that's the Spitalfields development, and you can see. So wider regeneration. Meanwhile, the city had improved its own commercial offer through site assembly, because the sites weren't big enough, fast-track planning, and the presumption in favour of development. So that's the view in 2010 from Centre Point, St Paul's in the middle. That's what the city skyline looked like in 2010. Photographed from the same place in 2020, this is how it has changed. You can see the walkie-talkie, the pinnacle, the cheese grater, wonderful names. And the city transformed. But now looking at future challenges, what's going to happen next, and how will working from home change the central London office market? As we know, and as we've all experienced, people started working from home some of the time, flexi time. And in 2019, the average was 4.3, this is a survey, an average was 4.3 days a week were worked in the office, and 0.7 not in the office. Stakeholder surveys show that this is likely to decrease to roughly just over 3 days a week. So people would not come to the office 2 days a week, and that seemed to be the common view. But there are counter trends to that. So if we just look to see what those counter trends are. So if you reduce from 4.3 to 3.1, it's a negative 28%. So the demand would fall 28% per year. If you looked at the peak occupancy adjustment, people needing more space, they didn't want to have desks next to each other, and there need to be breakout space and much bigger common parts, it reduces that negative by 63%. And then a de-densification, and that is a combination of adjustment, but also the fact that you can't plan for a peak occupancy of a building on the basis that people don't come on Monday or Friday or Tuesday and Thursday. You have to plan for the peak of that. So if you take them all together, you've got a negative of 28%. Peak occupancy, sorry, that was the last point, reduces the impact to 63%. De-densification, having more space, increases demand by 10%. So we were expecting a negative, that the structural demand for offices would decrease by 9% per year. So that's this line here, going down. But actually the economic market that was driving demand was going up. So actually, despite the structural implied demand, there was actually an increased demand for office space. Meanwhile, the city decided that it needed to create a task force to make sure that it understood what the drivers were, and it came up with a whole lot of policies to ensure residents, workers and visitors were safe, felt comfortable, and it created a support package for businesses, including rent relief during COVID and extending some of the recovery packages. Very quickly, workplaces of the future. My contention is that COVID-19 is a catalyst for changes that were already taking place. Work in 2020 was some way you went to. In 2025, it's going to be something you do. You work from anywhere. Work is not tied to a single physical location, relies on the cloud. In 2020, it's a rather static workforce tied to a building. In 2025, it will be a dispersed one, digitally enhanced. And the workplace, a collaboration hub, will move to hybrid workplace model with a social hub. The offices of the future, they'll be less dense, as we've spoken about, and this is 22 Bishopsgate, a new building, a lot of breakout space, more natural light, using roofs, breakout spaces, more natural ventilation. Lots of parks in the sky for the 7-day-a-week city. So a lot of buildings, we were encouraging them to use their flat roofs as a breakout space. Bloomberg already was ahead of the game, and in order to get, they joined, I think, 3 or 4 floors with internal staircases to stop people having to go up by lift. Good exercise and good health benefits there. Buildings incorporate a lot of health and well-being, exceptional cycling facilities, 22 Bishopsgate, a typical example. Buildings will be equipped with all of these in the future. The city streets, there was a street strategy, never been looked at before. How do people move around streets and what can be done to improve them? The squares, this is the square in my old ward, Aldgate Square. This is what it looks like today. Paid for, funny enough, by parking money. So that was another pot that the city had. Bank Junction, great success if you're a resident or a businessman, not if you're a taxi driver or a bus driver. They weren't very happy with that, but that's what it will look like, providing the consultation comes out positive. A quick tour of proposed buildings in 1 minute flat. If you went to the city, you hadn't been for a while, you'll see 22 Bishopsgate, 65% let and almost constructed. 6 to 8 Bishopsgate, just to the north, another building under construction. 40 Leadenhall Street under construction here. One undershaft was consented recently, and basically the top floor is a Museum of London curated exhibition, and it's allowed, the developers allowed schoolrooms 300 meters high. This is a wonderful building that's consented called the Diamond Tower in Leadenhall Street, which is going to be another feature of the city. 50 Fenchurch Street, again, we celebrated some archaeology, the 12th century land crypts, and a wonderful roof garden up there. 55 Gracechurch Street was consented, and again, roof gardens and incubation space for small businesses. And that is another of the buildings. 80% of last year's planning consent were consented in the first 2 months of this year. And this is a hotel consented, the greenest building in Europe, I'm told, circular economy principles, and that's in Ludgate. So this is what the city could look like, city skyline in 2026. And I've every confidence that these buildings consented will actually be built. So if we look back to the criteria of success, which I'll run through very quickly, the talent pool, well, I only give it 7 out of 10 because there's a big problem with visas and the government is struggling really to solve that one. A business-friendly environment with all of the buildings and improvements, I give it 8 out of 10. Sorry, that's building regulation, 8 out of 10 because of Brexit and uncertainty. Business-friendly environment works on predictability. Well, Brexit has made things a little less predictable. Infrastructure built environment from the buildings and the streetscape, etc., 9 out of 10. Access to international markets marked down because of the problems with Heathrow and delivering some of our infrastructure. And the cluster, I give 7 because it links to the talent pool. In conclusion, the city really is thriving, even in difficult times, and it's opening up slowly but strongly. And that's through insightful city leadership. And the post-COVID city will result in accelerated transformation of the city, I believe, making it more resilient to future changes. The result, cleaner, greener, more humane, healthier, gentler, vibrant, and more socially and economically inclusive city. And we need, of course, to out-Singapore Singapore in fintech and green finance. And that's the principle-based regulation. And there's a continuing role for us in the Worshipful Company of Engineers feeding into all these technological changes, especially in promoting engineering in the City of London. So my contention at the end of my lecture is I believe we will have a resurgent city for all our futures. Thank you very much.